It happens when you are not ready for it. You are folding clothes. Or eating food that has gone cold. Or just sitting on the floor next to the baby mat because the couch felt too far away and your body stopped cooperating an hour ago. And you look over. The way you always look over. That constant checking that becomes automatic the moment you bring a baby home. And your baby is not moving. Not asleep. Eyes open. Wide open. Head tilted back just a little. Staring straight up at the ceiling like something is up there. Like something important is happening up there. You wait. Nothing. You wave your hand in front of their face. Nothing. You say their name, the name you thought about for months, and it disappears into the room like you said it to a wall. They are not looking at you. They are not looking at anything you can see. They are just gone. Still there, breathing, eyes open, but gone somewhere you cannot reach. You tap their cheek. They blink. They look at you. And their face has this expression that you cannot quite explain, like you walked into a room and interrupted something private. And you are left standing there, heart still going a little fast, thinking, what just happened? And underneath that, something harder to say out loud. Not just worry. Something more like the specific loneliness of not being able to follow someone you love into wherever they just went. Here's what the research actually says about that moment. Let's start with what everyone assumes. The theory most parents, and a lot of pediatricians, go with is simple. The baby zoned out. The brain went quiet for a second. Nothing was happening. Like a phone screen going dark when you have not touched it. It sounds right. When someone stops responding, that usually means nothing is going on. That is how it works with adults. That is how it works with older kids. You zone out, you come back, and the time in between was basically empty. So parents either shrug it off, just a baby thing, or they start worrying. They Google. They find words like absence seizures and neurological pauses, and suddenly it is midnight and they are 4 pages deep into a medical forum trying to decide if something is wrong. Most pediatricians, when asked, will say it is probably nothing. And they are not lying. But they are also not telling you what is actually happening. Because for a long time, nobody knew. Babies were thought to be simple. What they could not say, people assumed they were not doing. The brain was considered mostly quiet in those early weeks. A system warming up. Not yet online. Then a group of researchers decided to actually measure what was going on inside those still, staring moments. What they found was not what anyone expected. In 2012, a team at the University of California, Davis, led by a developmental neuroscientist named Dr. Faraz Farzan, published a study in the journal Developmental Science. They were looking at what happens inside a baby's brain during those early weeks, specifically during the quiet moments when babies go still and stare at nothing. They were not watching behavior. Behavior in a newborn tells you almost nothing. They were measuring actual brain activity. The electrical signals firing inside the visual part of the brain, the part that processes everything your eyes take in. And what they found stopped people in the field. During the moments that looked the most like nothing was happening, the blank stares, the locked-on-ceiling stillness, the moments parents were tapping cheeks trying to break, the visual part of the brain was running at some of its highest levels of activity. Not low. Not quiet. High. Let that land for a second. The moments that looked most empty on the outside were the moments most full on the inside. Your baby was not gone during those stares. Your baby was, in a very real and measurable way, working harder than almost any other time. But working on what, exactly? This is where it gets specific. And this is where everything changes. A baby's brain does not come into the world ready to see. Not really. It has spent 9 months in the dark, picking up light and shadow through layers of fluid and tissue. But a real visual scene, edges, shapes, depth, the difference between a face and a wall, that is all completely new. And the brain has a specific order for learning to handle it. It does not start with faces. It does not start with movement or color or your smile. It starts much simpler than that. It starts with edges. The clean line where one surface ends and another begins. The boundary between ceiling and wall. The shadow in the corner of the room. Think of it like learning to read. You do not start with full sentences. You start with individual letters. You learn the basic shapes first. Only once those shapes are locked in can your brain start putting them together into words. The ceiling is the alphabet. In 2018, a separate team at the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences, led by a researcher named Dr. Moritz Koster, published findings in Current Biology that went even further. They tracked exactly what types of visual information babies look at most in their first weeks of life. And the answer was consistent: high contrast edges and plain, uniform surfaces. Exactly what a ceiling looks like. Exactly what a blank wall looks like. Your baby was not staring at nothing. Your baby's brain was choosing, on purpose, the exact visual information it needed most. In plain terms, the ceiling is not boring to a newborn. To a newborn's brain, the ceiling is one of the most useful things in the entire room. Here's what is happening in real time. The visual part of your baby's brain is doing something called edge detection calibration. It is studying the line between the ceiling and the wall. Not looking at it the way you look at something and recognize it. Measuring it. Working out the exact point where the bright surface becomes a slightly darker one. This matters because that same system, the one learning to find edges right now, is the system that will one day find the edge of your face. The line of your jaw. The boundary of your eye against your skin. The shape of your mouth when you smile. Before the brain can read a face, it has to learn how to find where things start and stop. And it has to do that work on something simple first. The ceiling is simple. The wall is simple. That is the whole point. What researchers call spatial frequency tuning, the brain's ability to tell the difference between fine and coarse visual patterns, is being built right now, in those quiet staring moments. The longer and deeper the stare, the more of that work is getting done. The stillness is not a side effect of this process. The stillness is the process. The brain is blocking out everything else, your voice, the sounds in the room, the feeling of the mat, so all its power can go into this one job. But here is where it gets more specific. You may have noticed it is not always the ceiling. Sometimes it is the corner of the room. The edge of a window frame. The place where a lamp sends a shadow across the wall. That is not random. Shadows are, for a developing brain, some of the richest information available. A shadow is not just a dark patch. A shadow is a smooth transition, light shifting gradually from bright to dim across a surface. And that transition carries information. It tells the brain about the shape of the surface, the angle of the light, the relationship between objects in space. In other words, shadows teach depth. They teach the brain that the world is three-dimensional. That things exist in space, not just flat on a screen. And the corner of the room? That is where two walls meet at an angle, two surfaces, two different planes, creating a shadow gradient that changes all the way along its length. It is, in its simplest form, a depth lesson. Your baby found that corner without anyone pointing to it. Without any instruction. Without any understanding of what depth even is. And their brain locked onto it because, neurologically, that is exactly where the most valuable information was sitting. And then there is this. The part that worries parents most. The not responding. You say their name. You wave. You lean into their sightline. And they do not come back. This is not a neurological absence. It is not a seizure. It is not a sign that something is wrong. It is called attentional gating. And it is something healthy, well-developed brains do. Here is how it works. The brain only has so many resources at one time. When it is doing heavy work in one area, it borrows from the others. During a ceiling stare, The visual processing work is demanding enough that the brain temporarily reduces how much it responds to other signals, sound, touch, movement in the room. Your baby can still hear you. The sound is still going in. But producing a response, turning the head, shifting the gaze, making an expression, that takes resources that are currently being used somewhere else. So the response is put on hold. Think of a surgeon in the middle of a difficult procedure. If you spoke to them, they would hear you. But turning around, making eye contact, answering properly, that would pull focus away from what they are doing. So they do not. Not because they have left the room. Because they are completely in it. When you tap your baby's cheek and they blink and refocus, you have not woken them up. You have just given the brain a signal strong enough to redirect. They were not far away. They were right there, working. The tap just changed the task. There is one more layer here that almost no parent hears about. The work your baby is doing right now, in these early weeks, in these quiet staring episodes, is not practice. It is not preliminary. It is the foundation that every later visual skill will be built on top of. Face recognition runs on it. Visual tracking runs on it. The ability to reach for a toy accurately, to read your expression from across the room, to eventually follow words on a page, all of it is downstream of the edge maps and depth calibrations being constructed right now. The visual system does not build itself all at once. It builds in layers. The deepest layers have to be solid before the ones above them can form. And this is when the deepest layers go in. What looks like a baby doing nothing is a baby doing everything, laying down the neural structure that the rest of their development will sit on top of. Every quiet stare is a brick in that foundation. Now I need to tell you about the finding that researchers describe as the most surprising result to come out of this area of study. When I first read it, I went back and read it again. Twice. Because the natural assumption, the completely reasonable thing any caring parent would think, runs in exactly the opposite direction from what the data shows. Here is the assumption. If your baby spends a lot of time staring blankly at the ceiling, checked out, unresponsive, seemingly absent, that probably means they are a little behind. The engaged baby, the one who tracks faces and reacts to sounds and is alert and interactive, that is the baby who is ahead. The still, quiet baby staring at nothing is the one you worry about. That is what the assumption predicts. That is the opposite of what the research found. Researchers at the University of Oregon's Developmental Cognition Lab followed a group of babies from birth all the way through 18 months. During the first 12 weeks, they tracked something they called sustained non-social gaze, which is a research way of saying ceiling staring. How long? How often? How deeply? Then they waited. At 4 months, they measured how fast the babies could visually track a moving object. At 8 months, they tested object permanence, whether the baby understood that a toy still existed when it was hidden. At 12 and 18 months, they looked at spatial reasoning. The babies who had stared at the ceiling the most in their first 12 weeks, the ones who seemed least engaged, the ones whose parents had worried and Googled and gently tapped their cheeks, those babies tracked moving objects faster at 4 months. They understood object permanence earlier. Their spatial reasoning scores were higher at 12 months. The babies who seemed the most absent were the ones who were quietly moving the fastest. The blank moments were not blank. They were an investment. The brain was front-loading the work, spending heavily in the early weeks so it could move faster in the months that followed. Think about what that means for you. Every time you looked over at your still, staring baby and felt that quiet worry, that specific feeling of not being able to reach them, of wondering if something was off, your baby was in the middle of their most productive work. The stillness that worried you was the evidence of acceleration, not delay. The moments that looked most like falling behind were the moments the brain was running furthest ahead. And if you spent those early weeks doing what any loving parent would do, tapping the cheek, saying the name, trying to connect, you did not hurt anything. The brain is resilient. It picks up where it left off. But you now know what was happening on the other side of the stillness. You were calling to them. And they were busy building the eyes they would need to see you clearly. They were learning how to find you. Ceiling staring is not your baby checking out. It is your baby checking in on the most important visual work their brain will ever do. That is not a comforting way to spin it. That is what the science says. So here is the one thing to do differently. When the stare starts, when you see their gaze go up and their body go still, let it finish. That is it. Just let it finish. Do not tap the cheek. Do not wave. Do not call the name. Give the brain the quiet it is asking for. The episode will end on its own. You will know because they will blink, shift, and come back, gaze dropping from the ceiling, eyes finding the room again, expression softening back into the baby you recognize. That moment, when they come back and find your face, that is when you show up fully. Eye contact, warm voice, a smile they can see. Because the work just finished. And now they are ready to connect. You are not being hands-off. You are being smart. You are reading your baby's rhythm and responding to what they actually need, instead of what your worry is asking for. You do not need to buy anything. You do not need to change your routine. You just need to let the ceiling do its job. And trust that your baby will come back when they are done. Most of these episodes last somewhere between 5 and 30 seconds. In the very early weeks, occasionally up to a minute. They end on their own. And when they do, your baby comes back, some movement, some sound, some recognizable sign that they are present again. That natural ending is the thing to pay attention to. If you notice episodes that go significantly longer, 2, 3, 4 minutes with no natural end, especially if you see any kind of rhythmic movement in the face, eyelids, or arms during them, mention that to your pediatrician. Not with alarm. Not as an emergency. Just describe what you saw, specifically, and let them listen. And if your baby comes back from the stare but does not seem to return to their usual alertness, if the re-engagement after the episode is consistently absent or flat, trust that instinct. Early conversations with your pediatrician change what support can accomplish in ways that waiting cannot. For most parents reading this, none of this applies. What you have been watching is healthy. It is necessary. It is the brain doing exactly what it is supposed to do, exactly when it is supposed to do it. But you deserve the honest version, not just the reassuring one. So the next time you look over and see it, the head tilted back, the eyes locked on the ceiling, the stillness that used to make your chest tighten, you will know what to do. Nothing. Because what is happening in that moment is this: a brain that has only been in the world for a few weeks is doing the hardest work it will ever be asked to do. It is learning how to see. Not looking at things and recognizing them, that comes later. Before any of that can happen, the brain has to build the tools. The basic maps. The ability to find an edge, read a shadow, understand that the world has depth. That is what the ceiling is for. That is what the stillness is for. That is what those quiet, unreachable moments are for. And here is the thing about what they are building toward. The edge maps your baby is making right now, tracing the line where the ceiling meets the wall, following the shadow in the corner, those same maps are the ones that will one day help them find your face in a crowded room. The system being calibrated in these quiet moments is the system that will let them look at you, really look at you, and know without a single word exactly who you are. They were not gone during those stares. They were getting ready. Getting ready to see you clearly. To know your face. To reach for you with a certainty that does not need language to explain itself. You thought they were absent. They were building the eyes to find you. If this changed how you see one of those quiet moments with your baby, subscribe. We put out new videos on infant and toddler psychology every week. The kind of research that makes ordinary moments feel completely different. And tell me in the comments, what did you think was happening before you watched this? What did you do when your baby went still like that? I read every comment and I want to know. And if you want to know why your baby keeps putting everything in their mouth, and why the answer genuinely surprised researchers, that video is next.